So good morning, everyone. I'm Margaret Brodkin, the founder and director of Funding the Next Generation. And we're very excited that you came to the launch of what is going to be a very exciting year coming up. And, you know, this will be a very fast overview of what's happened in the past year and some of what might be in store. It's like a sampler. So I want people to indulge a very fast moving pace of this. Funding the Next Generation is in business to inspire people to use the ballot to get more money for kids at the local level. And if you can't use the ballot, to get involved in your local budget fight. But it's all about having communities put their money where their values are. The purpose of this webinar is to look at what happened in the past year in California and to help people around the state. And this is being recorded, by the way, and you will be able to pass this on to your colleagues, help people consider what options for local revenue campaigns there are, and to give us a feeling about what it is that people want to know. It's a very full and kind of crazy agenda. So we're going to start. Is Dave Metz on yet?
No.
We are going to start with looking at sort of what.
Oh, he is. Dave is here now.
What?
Dave is now here.
Okay, Dave, unmute yourself because I'm getting ready to call on you and I have your slides on my slide deck. So we're going to start by looking at what has happened from a broad view in California with revenue measures. Then we're going to dig down into what happened in California with children's revenue measures. And we're going to look at 8 places. We're going to look at them very quickly, but just to give you a sampling and a feeling for what's been happening and what we've learned. And then we will give 2 of our most wonderful consultants, Nicole Derse from 50+1 Strategies, and Dave, who will also speak at the beginning of this, time to sort of reflect on what this tells us about the future political landscape. And then in the end, we have a poll and we want you to share your ideas about what you need support on, and we'll have a little chat discussion about what comes in the future for Funding the Next Generation. I am going to first turn to Dave Metz, who has been a consultant to Funding the Next Generation since its outset. He is the president and of course a principal at FM3 Research, which is one of the outstanding polling firms in the country. And I don't know of anybody else who has learned as much and done as much polling on children's issues, particularly children's revenue issues, as Dave Metz. And he is going to just give us a quick overview of what's happening and what happened in California. And I'm going to move the slides, Dave, for you. So you're going to have to tell me when to go on to the next slide. So Dave, are you there?
I'm here. All right.
Cool. So we're going to try this. So you'll have to say next slide.
No problem. Thank you as always for the kind introduction, Margaret. Good to see everybody today. And also very happy to be talking about what was in relative terms a much more successful November for revenue ballot measures than was the case in March. I think coming out of the primary election, there was a lot of concern that we might be entering an era of austerity and negativity from California voters, where they were inclined to reject rather than embrace tax increases. And what the November election showed us was really that those March results seemed to be an aberration, and that Californians still do see a pretty compelling need for public investment and are willing to embrace well-designed proposals to provide it. So if we move to the next slide, we can take a look at what some of the overall numbers show statewide in California. And I think as I say, the results are pretty encouraging. So here you'll see the total number of local revenue measures that were on the ballot in a variety of elections going back to 2006. And within each bar, you can see the number that passed and then the number that failed. The purple is the passage, the orange is the failure, and you'll see the total percentage that were successful in each of these elections in parentheses at the top of each bar. So the bottom line is the March election really stands out as something of an oddity, with only 40% of measures getting approval. That was the lowest since June of '06, and even then it was 14 points higher. In November, we were at a 76% approval rate, which is right around the average of where we've been in California over the course of a range of November election cycles. There's a number of things that I think made March different, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but the bottom line is we're in a much better place in November than what we saw before. As is no surprise, the measures that were most likely to pass last November were ones that required a simple majority vote. General taxes. You'll see at the top of the list, 108 of 132 city general tax measures passed, and at the county level, it was a clean sweep. 8 out of 8 county general taxes were approved, including some that folks on this call were involved in. This just reiterates that getting that 2/3 threshold is incredibly difficult. You'll see the passage rates for measures that required a 2/3 vote are much lower on average. The best success, of course, was school parcel taxes, and there were relatively few of those in jurisdictions where there was likely to be high confidence that they would be approved. So this is what we've run up against many, many times. Obviously, we're working collectively on ways to try to have more majority vote measures, and I think this data suggests that the chances for success with them remain very, very good. Separate from that, as you'll see on the next slide, we also have the question of whether or not we are requiring a majority vote or a 2/3 vote, which kinds of funding mechanisms are the ones that voters are most likely to embrace. Here you'll see the number of successful and failed measures that fall into a variety of different tax categories. The most popular tax, as always, is the sales tax. Those measures have fared very well. Then we had county and special district parcel taxes that required a 2/3 vote. And while they did well for schools, they did not do well otherwise. Again, I think it's the 2/3 vote as opposed to the parcel tax mechanism that's driving most of the problem there. And then the third item, one that we've talked a lot about as a group, cannabis taxes. They were overwhelmingly successful across the board, and there were a lot more of them than there have been in previous elections. That is likely to continue, and that remains, I think, a very helpful revenue source for us to consider. And then the others that you'll see below that, lodging tax, transient occupancy tax, utility users tax, those don't generate as much money, and there's competition for those sources of revenue, but they remain ones that are generally popular with voters.
Dave, since we had a cannabis tax that we were all very invested in that didn't pass, are most cannabis taxes general taxes, or were they dedicated?
Most of them were general taxes.
Yeah, that's okay.
That's really the key distinction there. You know, the mechanism is far less important than whether it's a general tax or a special tax in terms of its success. And actually, I think the next slide illustrates that. So here you'll see the rates of passage for general taxes and for special taxes statewide, both since 2001. Those are the orange bars in the middle of the slide, and then in November of last year, which is the broader blue bars. So basically, last November's election were slightly better than the overall passage rates, but the key thing here is that gap between 2/3 votes and general taxes, and it's enormous. It's a 25-point difference in passage rates over the course of the last 2 decades. It's basically a coin flip if you've got a special tax, and obviously that's excluding all the other factors that we know influence it in terms of campaigns, et cetera, whereas a majority vote, it's more like a 0.75% passage rate. It's also worth noting that sales taxes, being the most popular mechanism here, one of the things that was interesting in last year's election was the tax rate made very little difference in measures' successes. So this is sort of an odd graph, but if you look at the horizontal axis, that's showing different sales tax rates. Each vertical line is, you know, either 1/4%, 1/2 cent, 3/4, 1 cent, or more. And you'll see that at every single rate, there were more measures that passed than were rejected. And even when we look at 1 cent, which is the highest amount that most people were going for, there were only a handful that failed and there were plenty that succeeded if they were going for that simple majority vote. So this suggests, and most polling shows this too, we don't need to trim our sails with the tax rate. We can, if having more money, if having a higher rate allows us to have a bigger coalition and get more money for kids, we shouldn't be bashful about going after it. So differences between March and November, I think what it boils down to Oh, I see the question in the chat. That last graph was just November 2020. It was just last year's measures. What made March so bad? Too many measures on the ballot. I think people were overconfident about the degree to which the presidential primary turnout would make that a better election than it typically is. And the fact that there were more measures and that it was kind of an odd political context made that not come true. COVID, the economic downturn, which hit just before Election Day, I think did spook some voters and cause some uncertainty. I think there was also an underinvestment in campaigns for March. There was an assumption that good turnout among Democrats would kind of lift those measures, and in some jurisdictions they didn't spend what they probably needed to turn out voters and persuade them. And then less acute sense of need. November, I think the downturn in the pandemic highlighted the fact that we had a crying need for resources, that existing inequities in California were exacerbated by the pandemic. And that probably helped to lift the enthusiasm for measures in November in a way that in March, when people thought the economy was doing much better, that perception probably wasn't as acute. Remains to be seen how many of these trends hold for 2022, but as scared as we were in the spring, I think overall the results from November are encouraging looking forward.
That was great, and that's a good introduction, and some of it applied to what happened on children's issues, and some of it didn't as much. So what I'm going to do now is tell you, spend about 10 minutes telling you what happened in California on children's related tax issues. I think there is a huge amount to learn and a huge amount of fabulous work that went into this. And I'll say at the outset, whether you win or lose a campaign, you gain a huge amount of momentum, knowledge, credibility, etc. So on the screen, there are 4 kinds of strategies, and I wanted to do this so you could get a good overview and an overview of the differences of what happened. So the first 3 were all ballot strategies, and I put on the last one because I think they are things that are going to lead to ballot measures. So these are the ways you can get more money for kids in your local communities. First is a dedicated tax, and that is a tax that is dedicated to a specific use. And that is the best kind of tax to have if you get for a tax related to children and youth, for something that you care about. And San Joaquin County put a cannabis tax on the ballot in November. It was their second effort to do that. It was a groundbreaking effort. Half the money was targeted for children and youth specifically. The other half was health and enforcement and homelessness. But the fact that half was dedicated to kids. Now, it didn't pass. And I put it at the top because it got 65% of the vote. And unfortunately, in California, if you want a dedicated tax, it has to have 2/3 of the vote, but that is changing. So the other dedicated tax that was on the ballot in Alameda, and again, it was a second effort, put it on the ballot through petition of the voters, rather than like San Joaquin, where it's the Board of Supervisors that put it on the ballot. And it was a well-funded campaign. It was totally community-led. It was parent-led. It funds early care, and it also funded the pediatric hospital, which is a really cool idea because then the hospital has money and could pay for gathering the signatures. And I put 2 stars after it. The stars are the ones that passed. 2 stars after Alameda. It's still a little bit in court, but the court case is going really well, and it's expected to win in court. And the court case, for those a lot of you know, is if you put something on the ballot by signatures, it is still unsettled whether that is going to require a majority vote or a 2/3 vote, but it's looking increasingly, and I want everybody on this call, we are very optimistic. There have been at least 3 cases now in the higher courts that have been settled on the idea if it's put on the ballot by signatures, you're only going to need a majority vote. And we will have a whole session on that and what that means and the implications of that. And we will have sessions on all these things, but that is an exciting development. In Sonoma, there was a dedicated tax, and I described this as a tax the county wanted to put on the ballot for its own, revenue and budget problems. And then the Children's Advocate through the First Five Association, I say the train had left the station with the county, but they got on the train full speed ahead. And this is another strategy that you can use. If the county is going forward and has a dedicated tasks, you get behind it and you make sure that children are part of the planning and are visible in the campaign, and you sell that idea to the people who've put the tax on the ballot. And in that case, that surprised me. It got 68% of the vote. So that is pretty amazing, and I think it speaks to the county being behind it. The next kind of tax is a general tax. In some ways, that's the least desirable because the money can go to any general purpose from the Board of Supervisors or City Council wants, but it can really be great if you have a lot of credibility, if you have pushed the city, as happened in Long Beach with these amazing organizers from Khmer Girls in Action. If you are poised to do the advocacy and make sure that children and youth get a lion's share of the money, as was the case in Long Beach. And it is an interesting story in Long Beach. This wasn't their first choice of what to do, and they see it as, on the path to doing a more targeted measure. They wanted to do a soda tax, that became illegal. They wanted to do a real estate transfer tax. We learned legally that you can't dedicate a real estate transfer tax. They wanted to do a set aside, which we'll talk about in a second, but then the pandemic hit and collecting signatures became hard. So they decided something is better than nothing. Let's get this ball rolling. The third kind of strategy that went on, and it got 57% of the vote. The third kind of strategy is something that we call a budget set aside. I particularly love this strategy. That's how we got the Children's Fund passed, like now 3 times, how we've gotten most of our children's funding passed. And part of the reason is if you're not trying to get a new tax, you only need 50% of the vote. The most dramatic thing that went on probably in the country happened in LA. And it's quite a story, and it's a story we can all learn a lot from as we move forward with this year of learning and planning and collaborating on learning. But in Los Angeles, after the George Floyd murder, and the place was in a state of just moral outrage about what was happening around the country with law enforcement. In August, a group of social activists talked to each other and said, we got to put something on the ballot. And they put this amazing thing up. Well, actually, they advocated with the Board of Supervisors, and the pressure was so high they got the Board of Supervisors to put it on the ballot. It says 10% of the discretionary general fund will go to what they called community reinvestment, alternatives to incarceration, and youth development was very high on that list. They had opposition from labor, they had opposition from law enforcement, but the decades of work in Los Angeles of organizing work around social change, actually, and an incredible digital campaign got 57% of the vote. And I do need to point out that 10% of the discretionary general fund in LA County is $1 billion. So they're pretty excited about that. In the city of Sacramento, they tried what we did in San Francisco, in Oakland, in Richmond, to put a measure on the ballot that said 2.5% of the general fund will go to a youth fund. We were all sure that was going to pass. They had an incredible youth-driven campaign until the mayor decided that this was going to screw over the city budget. And he launched an incredible negative campaign against this and engaged, I think, the fire department, and got a lot of money to oppose this. Very sad, unfortunate. But they are not given up, and that's the understatement. After having raised so much visibility, the city council decided to give $9 million to youth services out of COVID dollars. And the mayor has promised, okay, I'll help you the next time. We'll do it together. So that's a work in progress. But it speaks to the point is, even when you lose, you've got momentum, you've raised the issues. The last two things I want to that I want to highlight are two incredible battles around the state around getting just money out of the budget. The first in the city of Pomona, which is it was a youth-driven effort by Gente Organizada, and you will hear a little bit about that. But basically, they had done the homework about the budget. They had done, they had documented and made a lot of noise about inequities and funding, how the city was and was not spending money on kids, and how inequitable the resources were. And so they tried to get a measure on the ballot, but that didn't happen. But instead, the city council put $1 million of CDBG. It's only 150,000 people in this city. $1 million of CDBG money into youth services, and decided to put half their developers' fee into youth artists. So this is a remarkable achievement. And then lastly, we've done webinars on what happened in San Diego, which the Early Care Coalition turned its attention to local issues and carried on a very sophisticated campaign that started with the Board of Supervisors taking $5 million out of CARES for childcare. Then they challenged the city to take $5 million out of CARES for childcare. And then it was so popular and so successful, and so many people got involved that ultimately the county primarily put $35 million into childcare, both going to the centers and yes, directly stipends. So that's the story of what happened around the state. That's 6 ballot measures, 2 won, 2 lost, 1 in court. 3 of these efforts were youth were the drivers of the campaigns. 2 were signature campaigns out of the 6 campaigns. 2 of the ballot measure campaigns were specifically related to issues of our time, what was happening with COVID, and what was happening with sort of the outrage about sort of law enforcement and police brutality. 3 of the 6 were doing it for the second time. And in all of the cases, they were doing a journey, and they're still lose or pass, they are in the middle of a journey to get more money for kids. So now what I am going to do is turn to the leaders, our leadership in the 8 campaigns that I told you about. And the reason I did the overview, I wanted you to see things together, but I want the people who are talking, and they each have 4 minutes, and I'm going to introduce my friend and colleague and facilitator Nancy Rubin, who is going to help us make sure it's only 4 minutes, because we want to give everybody a chance. Nancy, I don't know if you want to say hello. If you wanna-
Hello.
There she is. And,
Yeah, I'll send you just a little note in the chat when you're getting to 3.5 minutes. How about that?
and when you're getting to 3.5 minutes, I will also probably go on to the next slide to remind you that you need to wind it down. So we're going to start with San Joaquin County with Christina Gilbert, who is the director of the San Joaquin Alliance for Children, and she is going to tell us what she learned from this experience.
Thanks, Margaret. Hi, everybody. Margaret, I want to let you know I was prepared and I have my timer going so that I can stick to the 4 minutes. This was, as Margaret said, our second go around. We were at the ballot with a measure very, very similar to this in 18. And I think that the thing that we definitely already knew, and that was reiterated by this, is that this is hard and it's a long road. And that doesn't make it bad or wrong or not worth fighting, but something that Margaret and I have talked about, and even I've had great conversations with Jim Keddy and helping to kind of set perspective and frame of reference is you need to be prepared for the long haul. And so we've done this twice. We've come painfully close twice, and we're already strategizing for how we go back to the ballot. So if you have that already in your mind, you don't see it as a loss, you'll see it as what's next. And I found that to be particularly helpful. And so that's really number one. The other thing is specifically around cannabis. Cannabis for our conservative county, it was a positive and it was a challenge. In a conservative county, a sales tax is going to have a pretty high hurdle. And we had a strong argument that cannabis was new revenue. And so it really helped us frame the conversation in a different way and immediately remove some of those barriers. But what we find is you have to have so many micro messages that can actually be the challenge. And when one of the ones that emerged this year that you just couldn't speak broadly enough to it was people were concerned that this tax was an extra tax on cannabis businesses. And during COVID, people are hyper aware of the hardships faced on businesses right now. And so people who would have voted yes, voted no, because they didn't want to make it harder for the businesses to operate. And when you're looking at a 2/3 measure there, we lost just a little bit in different places all over. That if we could have done some micro messaging, we might have been able to, because I mean, we literally lost by less than 2%. So, but we had a competing tax measure in one of the cities. We had a competing cannabis measure in one of the cities. Then we had these COVID variables. And so we really found that with cannabis, the messaging can be challenging, and that micro messaging might serve us better if we continue on this path in the future. And I will let you know that even in our conservative county, as you can see by the numbers, people aren't as concerned about cannabis anymore. But to us, we had to leave retail establishments off the table to make sure that was the far most objectionable part. And so we were like, we will let the cities duke that out. We can capture plenty of revenue by leaving that particular model off the table. And that really, really dropped most of the objections. If you had any problem with cannabis at all, it was almost always around that retail storefront. The other thing was that cannabis was hard for us to fundraise around. It always has been. The first time around, we had the support of the industry, and that was because it was an emerging industry in our county. And so they were throwing money behind it to get it passed because this would have opened the doors for them. But our county has since moved on through a process called development agreements. And since those development agreements, though arduous and slow, and in my personal opinion, sloppy governance, that is their path forward, and it costs a lot of money. So the problem is that as we've gotten further and further down this road, the cannabis industry itself has found another way forward, and yet nobody else really wants to fund something that is cannabis related. So there's a lot of challenges with people wanting their name or their business associated with cannabis. And then I'll just finish with this. Dave's right. 2/3 is hard. 2/3 is really hard.
Thank you, Christina. And now we're going to move on to what happened in Alameda County. Clarissa, are you with us?
Yeah. Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I'm also starting my own timer. it is almost impossible to talk about this campaign in 4 minutes. But I will say similar to Christina, and thank you, Christina, for your comments. This was our second time going to the ballot. We missed passing a 2/3 initiative for Alameda County. It was a half-cent sales tax to fund early care and education. And we missed that by 1,500 votes. It was very painful. And you learn a lot from that experience. And the primary thing that we learned that I want to share today in the few minutes that I have is that we learned that developing community leadership, developing a strong base that you can build into a coalition is absolutely critical, right? The win is important. It's important to win, obviously because our communities need these services. And that was really clear in COVID. And though I love how you put it, Margaret, you said we're a little bit in court. We are got our toes in court right now. But we know that these services, $140 million annually, what that could do for our communities. But the most important thing was to put at the forefront the parents, the childcare workers, and the community leaders who would benefit directly from this and who have been impacted by the lack of services historically. And that looked like women of color. That looked like centering, communities that have been hardest hit. And what we did was, engaged in deep community organizing. And, it's very important to have community there from the very beginning to be talking about this policy, to take ownership of the process and over the campaign, and really to excite, energize, and mobilize voters to engage their communities in conversation, especially as we're trying to elevate early care and education as an issue area, right? As importance, because we know that we know all of the stereotypes and the bias that comes with, with some of these services. And community, we had this beautiful campaign that developed powerful community leaders that can then go engage in other fights. This is not just about one campaign. Also, to Christina's point, this is about a longer term movement. We are, you want the win, like I said, the loss, you learn from it so that you can build better campaigns in the future. But this really is about building a better society, better neighborhoods, right? Building quality education for people over the long term, over generations. And we do that brick by brick, campaign by campaign. So we're thinking about this campaign as building infrastructure for a movement that creates a level of civic engagement, participation, and power within communities. And that is my 3-minute warning. And so what we learned are the strategies and tactics to do that in our neighborhoods with, how do we utilize the opportunities that present themselves in a campaign, right, to develop the leadership of community, and how do we center community in the campaign process, which can easily be taken over by experts, consultants, no offense, consultants in the space, but how do we leverage the input, the lived expertise, and also arm and build the skills and campaigning capacity for future fights. And so the last thing I'll end with this is that, through this campaign, we actually built a coalition of labor. It includes, 2 different labor unions on the healthcare side, as well as the ECE side. We have grassroots organizations and direct service providers. And that movement infrastructure will continue to bring in revenue and also support our communities for years to come. Thank you so much.
Fabulous. So now I want to turn to Angie Dillon Shore, who was part of the campaign in Sonoma County.
Thanks, Margaret. Good morning, everybody. So our team that had been planning to go to the ballot for a dedicated early childhood funding decided last spring, right before COVID hit, to hold off. Our polling was just not strong enough to inspire the confidence and the funding to raise the funding for a successful campaign, and 2/3 is hard. So we had decided to back off, and at the same time, our health department, specifically the behavioral health division, was working with the supervisors to put on a measure that would fund mental health services, specifically around homelessness and chronic severe mental illness. Although their measure was framed as new funding for new services, the department has been running a huge deficit for a few years This was a major driver for the measure. But anyway, a couple things that pulled for us, for our early childhood group, for our measure that we were going to propose was services for homeless families and addressing early childhood mental health. So we used this polling data and did a ton of public comment, turned out a lot of public comment at the board meetings where they were discussing their measure, did some one-on-one meetings with SUPS, and just put a lot of public visible pressure on them to rewrite the expenditure plan and include a specific carve out in their measure for children's mental health, which they did in the end, but there were some other factors as well. So the business community had already organized and made it clear that they were going to fund an opposition campaign to any new local, regional, or even state taxes, basically a moratorium. And this created a lot of drama and concern for the county. They were looking for ways to try to neutralize that. And several of those business leaders that led that opposition are actually early childhood champions and had supported our efforts in the past. One was actually a First Five commissioner. And so it became clear that some of the county leaders that were involved in their ballot measure planning thought that I might have some influence to get the business leaders to stand down. So without making any promises, because I knew I probably did not have the power to do that, I did leverage their perception for helping us to get on included children's mental health on that ballot measure. So in the end, the measure did pass at 68%. Other tax measures passed as well. The business community's moratorium was not an effective approach. And we'll see how it all plays out in implementation. That's going to be another story. But the big takeaway for me in this is that it's just so important to think about the local kind of the voter approved funding mechanism, the ballot, as an ongoing, almost a systemic entity, that campaigns and polling doesn't exist in a vacuum. And so even if you're not the lead on a measure, it's really critical to see the bigger picture. You can use your political capital, your relationships, your polling data, anything you've learned from your previous work. All of this could be really valuable to someone else's campaign, or they may just think it's valuable, like the perception that I had the power to neutralize the opposition. So I think it's just about staying involved, staying at the table, seeing where you can fit in. And I love Margaret's metaphor about the train was leaving the station. So I just got on and said, give me a seat. And that worked.
Okay, Leanne, are you there?
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm here.
Leanne Chuen. We're talking about Long Beach.
Yeah. Awesome. So thank you, everybody. So I'm going to keep mine hopefully under 4 minutes, but I just also want to ditto everything that Clarissa said around power building and base building and just how important that is. So some of our key lesson from Long Beach, because this measure was a youth-led measure that was supported by adult allies. And so our key lesson for us has always been that young people's voices and their process and building their buy-in from the very beginning is super important. And it really held us along the way through the pandemic because they were so committed to this process since the beginning. And this was also for us an opportunity to continue to build our base, but also build solidarity across communities of color because of the incredible impact and all the challenges with the pandemic. The other thing, the other lesson for us is about creating intentional spaces for the practice of co-governance and power building. And what that means for us is that giving young people the opportunity to help determine and shape their future. And that's, and so that goes kind of beyond just like the very, some of the more, like it goes beyond just voting, right? So it goes beyond just like some civic duties, but that we want them to understand actually what does it mean if we're kind of like helping to shape rules and laws, and what does it mean to get into the nitty gritty of understanding those things, right? So like, how can we participate in co-governance and how could we build power in our community? The other thing is that something that we learned is that we actually don't always know what our impact can be. So like just keep going is just so important, because throughout this process, particularly in this past year, we created a sense of belonging and purpose for young people during a pandemic and during a time where a lot of young people are dealing with isolation, depression, and chronic stress. And when we did our evaluation with the youth at the end, you know, a lot of this, like it moved me to tears, mostly because it was so hard for everybody. And then for the young people to kind of talk about that, despite how hard it was for them in distance learning, they knew they wanted to come after school to call voters and to tell voters how important it is for them to show up and get this measure passed. And and then finally, and I think this is, you know, something that Margaret said when she was naming all the stuff that we tried and hitting roadblocks. And just the importance of not giving up and keeping our eyes on the horizon. Because part of our kind of like long-term strategy is we really want to strengthen and deepen a multiracial democracy. And for young people to engage that early on and to commit them into that process early on and to show them what it would mean to do that, you know, in a loving and engaging way, and that they find that being in politics is cool, and that, you know, and that they want to take that up as part of their leadership and for themselves and for the community. And I see my time's up. Thank you.
Oh, that was fabulous. Is Julio there from Liberty Hill Foundation?
I'm here.
Julio, I made you under the time you had. So what were the lessons in 4 minutes of this amazing Measure J?
Well, again, always a pleasure to follow, you know, the real champion Leanne at Khmer Girls in Action and the work they did in Long Beach. You know, Measure J, you know, often people point to the victory. People talk about the 2.1 million people who voted yes for this historical ballot, which set shockwaves, not just in the county, but across the state and across the country. But also, you know, for me, I spent a lot of time talking about the origin of Measure J. You know, Measure J didn't just so happen to fall together in the month of August. It's the result of tireless pressure and organizing, which started in 2003, including folks like Khmer Girls in Action, who were part of a larger ecosystem of base building, power building groups in Los Angeles. We're really, really fortunate to have an infrastructure in Los Angeles that have been advocating, informing, and educating, and really not just changing the narrative, but really changing the power dynamic about why once and for all there needed to be an investment in young people from the beginning. And so we knew in LA that, you know, we were #1 for all the wrong reasons. We were the home to the largest justice system, meaning we incarcerate more young people. And when I reference young people, I'm being very specific: Black, Brown, API, Native, Indigenous, you know, you name it. We were #1. We were causing more harm than anything, and we wanted to change that narrative. But again, it's been a decades-long process to really figure out ways to support these amazing organizations who, from the very beginning, knew what the path forward was. But because we didn't have the political will or the public will, to be quite frank, in my opinion, I've been doing this work for about 22 years. And yet that all changed over the course of a decade, in my opinion. And so really what I wanted to share on this call is really the lessons and the reasons for success in LA was really having a strong foundation of social justice organizations and campaigns that really took decades to build. You know, the organizing that I keep referencing really allowed them to seize this unique opportunity in a time when, you know, the forces that were creating the political pressure to divest and to refund and reinvest in the community was played out. And as Margaret mentioned, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that the murder of George Floyd didn't help us accelerate that work. But, you know, it also played a big part in order to be successful. We knew it was critical for us to focus on really changing relationships and connections and power dynamics. And for us to really reach our North Star, which was always to create the nation's largest youth development system that was supporting young people from 0 to 24. We also knew that we needed to build the capacity to support systems change internally and externally. And in order to create that change in the system, I think Liberty Hill, we have to figure out a new role. We're very unique in the sense that we're a public foundation, which basically means that we're able to do a lot of things that traditional philanthropy can't do. And so we, understood that we weren't going to lead anything, we weren't going to create anything, but that we were going to take our orders directly from those organizers and those advocacy organizations from the start, and we were going to support them through raising dollars. And so, a big part of our role was raising dollars for this campaign, and it was not easy. We were competing with multiple other campaigns, and we were late in the game. But ultimately, again, this is the power of the organizing, the infrastructure, and the credibility of these social justice organizations, was that the board of supervisors themselves put this on the ballot. And ultimately, the narrative that had been created led to 2.1 million people voting in favor of Measure J. And so now is where the rubber meets the road, right? This is the implementation phase of Measure J. And, we want to ensure that the same level of engagement of those organizations are centered. But that takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of resources. So a lot of what we're focusing on right now is ensuring that those relationships, those connections are maintained, and also that the community is leading on this. But again, Margaret, as always, thank you for allowing us to tell the story of what took place in LA County.
Okay, that was great. And Jesus, are you there? Jesus is the founder and the director of Gente Organizada, which is, oh no, I absolutely have to apologize. Monica Marais is next. Which was a strategy similar to LA, a budget set aside. Monica, I know you're there, so you have 4 minutes to tell us a life of lessons.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity, Margaret. I'm really excited to hear about all the other movements that happened last year, but knowing that years and years of work was needed in order to push those efforts forward. So in Sacramento, unfortunately, in March of 2020, our measure did not pass. So Sac Kids First did do sort of that, was trying to do that budget set aside, collecting signatures to put the measure on the ballot. We faced pretty heavy opposition from the mayor, the fire and police union early on in February. So that was like a month right before the election. And that hurt our campaign pretty badly. And so we ended up losing. But as Clarissa was mentioning, like base building is so important in this work, because as you can see all the folks in this picture, like we built a really strong coalition. We had people that not only, were coming from different organizations, but we had community members. Sacramento in particular is very diverse. And so we wanted to make sure that young people were involved in this process. So we have kind of this intergenerational, very diverse group of organizers who are a part of the Sac Kids First Coalition. But I want to talk about what's coming up for us. So we are entering our third attempt at another ballot measure. We actually met with the mayor this month in January to talk to him about next steps. So understanding that he came out in opposition against us in March, we wanted to actually talk to him and say, hey, we want to make sure that moving forward, we are not on opposing sides. And so let's work together to develop both a timeline and sort of like an infrastructure on what this is going to look like, because this isn't about us, this isn't about anyone's individual political ego. It's about the people and what we can actually do to put our, the political egos aside in order to push these measures forward for our kids. So we also are creating opportunities to engage our opposition. We're hoping that we can have conversations with folks at the fire union, some of the businesses that came out in opposition of Measure D, so that we can better understand each other and hopefully get people to understand what we're trying to do for children and youth in Sacramento so that they can actually be on our side. We are including kind of this proposal to work with the mayor's office on this. So we sent them a proposal. We want to work with them. We included kind of like a timeline of events. So, fundraising, when the council would vote to place this measure on the ballot. And we actually got his commitment to meet on a monthly basis. So we're looking forward to that. But this year as a coalition, we're really excited about building our multiracial intergenerational group. So we're having a retreat next month. We're trying to really ground ourselves in our values and talk about how, yes, the campaign lost, but at the same time, what are we still doing to ensure that the city is holding good on its promise to invest in youth? We're going to talk about areas of opportunity and gaps in our work and how to strengthen youth voice and youth presence in our coalition. So we talked with the awesome organizers at the Rice Center so that we could work together. That was just my personal timer. So that we could work together in order to pursue sort of like this youth committee to strengthen our coalition. So I'm really excited. We have so many new youth members that are bringing a lot of energy to our work. So 2022 is right around the corner and we're gonna make it work, so.
Go team. Now I'm gonna turn to Jesus Sanchez from Pomona, the founder and head of Ente Organizada. Jesus, are you there?
I'm here, Margaret. Thank you so
Cool.
much. Hello, everyone. My name's Jesus. I use pronouns he, him, his, and I'm the founder and current director of Ente Organizada. We are a Pomona-based nonprofit that is a youth-led nonprofit. The majority of our board members are students. So our work is consistently centering the voices of young people and their vision for us, right? So I want to share some things about our work over the last, I think now almost 5 years. And I really want to reframe it, not necessarily as lessons, but as values, right? Because I think all of the work that we're doing is really challenging systems and our community's values in our budgets, right? And how it's reflected and how we care for our young people. So I really want to focus in on what I think we're trying to do is really develop a culture and a discipline in Pomona, right? And this is to focus on not necessarily just getting to a mountaintop and a victory, but the process, right? And I think a lot of what has been shared by the amazing colleagues throughout the state, I'm going to be echoing that. And I think the first one is really recognizing that these ballot initiative campaigns, they're an opportunity to train future organizers. It's really looking at them as opportunities to incubate future movements, future leaders, right? So I think a lot of the work and the framing for us is really looking at this as an opportunity to develop our members, to develop our young people, to dream bigger, and also participate in the democratic process, right? And learn and educate themselves. I think one of the things that I heard earlier was, you know, this work creates a sense of belonging and purpose for youth. Absolutely, it's hope, right? It's instilling hope in our young people in our communities. One of the other things that I wanted to just kind of uplift is this is about sharing power as well, right? One organization, one leader is not gonna do this work effectively, right? Even if you do get to a huge campaign victory or a ballot initiative victory, if we don't focus on creating democratic processes and shared power within the campaigns themselves, they're not gonna be long lasting, right? And really focusing on implementation as well. So one of the things that we're trying to develop a discipline around in Pomona is focusing on how that, you know, those $2 million that are going to be allocated for our young folks, how are they being spent? Who's making these decisions? Are our young folks that fought for this following this process, right? It's very easy to let go of that victory and move on to the next one. Oftentimes, a lot of our nonprofits probably feel pressure to then deliver another victory without fulfilling kind of and executing what we accomplished years ago or the prior year. So it's really developing a discipline around that too. And we're trying to practice that in real time. And I think for us, echoing the message from Julio, we've been at this since 2016, and we had a victory last year, right? So this has taken years of work and years of sacrifice, right? So a lot of this is going to take time, and I think my overall message is really just embracing the process. The process is where the work is at, where the magic happens. And yeah, and thank you so much for having me. I'll pass it back to Margaret.
I am actually now going to pass it on to our friends in San Diego, Courtney Balatiski, who works for the San Diego YMCA and has been a leader in sort of organizing the work that has been going on in San Diego. Courtney.
All right, thanks, Margaret, and thanks so much to everybody else who's spoken today. Just this time last year, I was a huge fangirl of y'all and your work and all the years that you'd put in. But I want to first recognize my partners in change who are also on the call today, and thank them for honoring me to continue to coordinate our efforts, and also take the time to honor, the parents who aren't on the call right now and the childcare providers who aren't on the call right now, but the ones who are doing a heavy lift every day, both within their own family units and childcare providers who are essential heroes and continue to go without the needed support that they deserve. So appreciate them honoring me with the privilege to speak with you all today. But as Margaret said, Courtney Baltiski, she, her, hers, and I work for the YMCA in San Diego, but I also have had the privilege of coordinating this organizing effort. So early on, when I started this work, a mentor said, it's not about luck, it's about data and relationships. And that is rung true, right? So when we think about relationships, at the end of February 2020, we welcomed Margaret and Ed down to San Diego. And that was really our first larger convening in the early care and education sector to come together and say, what can we be doing locally that we're trying to do federally and statewide? And then a couple weeks later, we got the shelter-in-place order, and the pandemic changed our dynamic entirely, right? We had also just started successful relationships with a couple elected officials who were potential champions on this issue. So we really appealed to those electeds as parents, right? And not saying that electeds who aren't parents can't be champions, but looking to especially to council members in the city of San Diego as our dadvocates. Those were relationships that carried us a long way during the pandemic and in getting these allocations. Relationships also rung true as we enter the COVID context, because in building our base, a lot of these relationships were formed virtually, just through Zoom squares. So taking the time to call people and sidebar with people, getting to know them and their organizations proved to be really important, right? This was my first time working with different unions. So working with UDW, UHW, as well as UDW CCPU in San Diego. I got to learn a lot about the levers that they could pull that as a nonprofit, we never could, right? It was actually UDW, UHW that was able to play a card with one of our supervisors that I never could. And that was, if he doesn't call us back, he owes us and our president will get the meeting, right? And so that was really powerful to just build the base wider and understand what different agencies could do and how to move this forward. So it really took a lot of us, and it happened really quickly, but we ended up getting an allocation of $5 million passed by our county for childcare vouchers to essential service workers. And then during that deliberation, they put a match to the city of San Diego, which was unprecedented. And the city took that on and matched it with another 5. And then Supervisor Fletcher down here, who has been our champion, also put out $25 million in CARES funding to provider stipends. And by using existing infrastructure in our alternative payment systems and by utilizing philanthropy with the San Diego Foundation, we were able to expedite the allocation of that funding much sooner than any of the state allocated pandemic relief funding for families or providers. So all that money has been allocated now, and we are trying to ride this wave and capture the momentum. As Jesus said, it's all about the process, and we are embracing that. We're trying to work to build new infrastructure in our county and city governments to be at a more ready place if and when a ballot initiative takes off down in San Diego. And I think, the only other thing that we would share was that, when you feel furious or sad or tired, self-care is paramount, and to reach out for help. So thank you to Margaret, who took calls and texts and emails from us on good and bad days, and also to the Children's Funding Project, which ended up being a tremendous resource in the data cultivation and just understanding the national landscape as CARES funding rolled out. But we're not done. You'll hear from us again. And thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you.
That's great. I think what I'm going to do now, this was so rich and fabulous, and it worked, and I'm just so excited. I'm going to turn to Dave right now. I hope you're there to go through some of what he's learned about messaging in these times and in these times ahead. And then I'm going to turn to Nicole. So Dave, if you're there, because I think it will be easy to use these slides right now. Are you there?
I am.
Cool. So.
All right. So let's dive in. So what I'm going to go through here are just some highlights of recent polling we've done, much of it actually outside of California since the start of the pandemic.
Where we're 5 minutes, Dave.
Where we're trying to assess the ways that new and emerging messaging may help to enhance people's willingness to support investments in kids. One of the things that's really striking is the degree to which people recognize that the difficulty parents face juggling work and childcare at a time when kids are not in school in person full time is a significant problem. This is polling data from Washington State, where we found that voters' level of concern about these challenges facing parents were right up there with the overall economic and health impacts of the pandemic as concerns for voters. And higher even than their concern about the cost of housing, the economy, jobs, and the cost of living. These are temporary circumstances, we hope, but I think the recognition that this has been a really tough time for parents adds some urgency to investments in youth that we don't always see. And so this is something definitely to keep an eye on moving forward. There is also a broad recognition among parents who are voters that the strains they're facing are ones that are not sustainable. In this same survey in Washington State, we found that only less than half of voters thought that their current circumstances, balancing work and caring for their kids, were going to work for the long term. And a majority of them said that it was only a short-term solution or already was a complete failure. And that was even more true for parents of kids under 5. So parents feel this acutely, but even non-parents perceive it to be the case. Encouragingly, what we have seen is that there is more attention now and recognition about the importance of childcare once we've been forced to go through this experience of not having it. So in Washington, this one is actually from, I believe, no, this one's from Washington as well. We asked people to indicate, given some statistics about the impacts on childcare that had happened since the start of the pandemic, whether people viewed early learning and childcare programs as more important, less important, or about the same as they did before the pandemic. More than 3 in 5 voters said they viewed such programs as more important. 5 times as many as said that they were less important. So we have kind of, you don't know what you've got until it's gone. And the fact that we have had to go without so many of these vital services, I think, has really helped to demonstrate to the public the importance of maintaining them. This is data from a national survey conducted by the First 5 Years Fund earlier this year. And what it shows is a broad consensus among the public that the pandemic has really highlighted, not necessarily created, but highlighted some deep and lasting inequities that are present in our society and the urgency of addressing them. You'll see here more than 3/4 of American voters agree that high quality, affordable childcare for families with young children is an essential service, that this has shown the importance of building a system that will make such care available and affordable to all families who need it. and that while we provide publicly funded care and education for children starting in kindergarten, we ought to do the same for younger children as well. So there is a desire not just for short-term fixes, but for big structural changes when it comes to investment in early learning and care that voters are after. So here are a range of messages that we tested in polling that we did in Wisconsin this fall, where we were testing the idea of a significant state investment in these programs. And while you'll recognize a number of messages in this top tier of themes that were present pre-pandemic, like the critical role of brain development for children under 5, you'll see a range of messages here that are new and reflect our current circumstances. The notion that we need to pay early childhood educators a living wage in order to make sure that we've got people in the profession who are going to be there for the long term, providing quality care and education for kids. The notion that it was already a stretch for parents without 2 incomes to be able to afford what they need to give to their kids, and that the pandemic has meant that people are in even more jeopardy of not having the resources they need, and therefore would benefit from our support. And then talking about people who fall into the gap, who make too much to benefit from a lot of public support that's available for parents of young children, but don't make enough, particularly in expensive places like California, in order to be able to provide their kids what they need right now. Those themes, I think, have increasing salience, and if the economy continues to struggle, we'll continue to have them. So here you'll see a summary of some of the themes that we think have been emerging as more effective in this space over the course of the last 6 months. The heightened urgency we've talked about. Obviously, anytime we're talking about fighting cuts as opposed to expanding services, we're in stronger position. It's obviously tragic that we have to do that, but we do have a much more compelling case. Messages around the economic return on investment of spending money on young children. Tends to be a lower tier message usually, but in the kind of economy we're in right now, it may have more salience. Essential workers as people who the public wants to support, and people who are in particular struggling at being able to care for their kids while having to work. That's a critically effective message. And then again, just sort of the inequities that have been present in our society for generations that are now, I think, in starker relief for many voters, provides a compelling case for making investments that will help to redress those equities at a time they also will benefit society more broadly.
Thank you. And now I'm going to turn this over to Nicole Derse, who is the founder and co-principal at 50+1 Strategies, who's been our mentor and at our side for years now. And we are blessed to have a political consultant who is just so devoted to this cause. And Nicole, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, and I can see you.
Great. Wow, this has been amazing. So just really congratulations to Margaret for pulling this off. When I saw all the people speaking, I knew it was going to be a challenge, but thank you to all the amazing organizers and leaders and advocates who just made this such a really successful webinar today. It's just awesome conversation. I'm going to just do a couple of things. First thing I want to do is just sort of summarize some of the great things that I heard over the last hour and 10 minutes in terms of the work that was done over the last year and lessons learned across the state. Some really amazing bits. I just want to make sure that we elevate and lift up for folks. And then I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about what we can do now and how can you as advocates, who are some of you considering 2022 ballot measures, looking to go back to the ballot, if you are unsuccessful first, second time around, or thinking about moving forward, and some things to think about there. So first of all, there are 6 things that I really got out of the conversation today, and in the conversations that I've had with many of you across the state who have been doing this work for a long time. The first thing is just that the cycle of engagement and power building really continues and is incredibly important to this work. So from LA to Long Beach to Alameda to Pomona, those of you that really talked about the importance in supporting organizations, building power amongst young people over the long term, particularly in communities of color and low-income communities, that's what makes it possible to fight for systemic change. It's a little bit of a chicken and an egg, right? Where we need to invest in these organizations to be able to build this power. But then once we have this power, we need to be able to use it to fight for systemic change and really funding in the communities. Really exciting. I think that these political campaigns, if done in the best way that they can be, as many of you have done, is really an opportunity to train young people, to give young people, as I think my friend in Pomona said, the opportunity to determine and shape their future. Really exciting that this is really what this is about, and that we determine our success, not just on did we win or lose, but how many young leaders come out of this, really empowered to fight for the communities moving forward. The second thing I heard is that we just generally need more time. So the successful campaigns don't happen overnight. They also always don't happen overnight when, there's not a ton of resources, or when you have opposition, or when you have a stressed out electorate like we do right now. So we need to actually be thinking about how can we start a campaign today for 2022 or even for 2024 that really the movement building work that's being done, as well as the public awareness work, is incredibly important to getting us ready to be successful at the ballot box. And that we should not be thinking about an electoral campaign outside of the context of our larger goals for legislative advocacy, for building more community capacity. All of those things really matter. I wanted to highlight what the woman from San Diego said. Just building those relationships are so key. And I do think it's something that many folks within the child advocacy community can really need to take the time to prioritize. It's really hard because so many of the childcare providers, youth organizing, youth empowerment workers, and I started myself as, working as a youth empowerment coordinator for the Youth Commission in San Francisco. And, I understand how stressed folks are and how much is on their plate, how underpaid they are. So it's difficult to think about going up, even doing more. And that means like building stronger relationships with electeds, champions, being involved in what's happening across the communities, the city, the counties, knowing what's going on. Are other people considering taxes? Are there places where you could look at partnering, taking the time to do that and to think about the long-term goal of the campaign is really important. Third thing is just opposition sucks. Opposition is really difficult. I was lucky enough to work with the folks in Sacramento, SAC Kids First, and having a powerful mayor and unions like the firefighters against it is really difficult to overcome. And so figuring out how to either neutralize that opposition or ideally, get as much support as possible is really important. And if you're going to have the opposition, to know that it means that you've got to have, more resources and more time. 2/3 is tough. We know that. San Joaquin talked about that. Alameda talked about that. The fact that San Joaquin got as close as they did, an electorate where, Democrats underperformed in San Joaquin County. There were a lot of losses there across the board, and they came so close. We really need to take advantage of the 50+1 opportunity here through signatures. This is absolutely key. For those of you that haven't been following this as closely, there's been court rulings now in both San Francisco and just in Fresno, two very different communities, right? That show us that the courts are saying if you get, say, it's on the ballot through signatures and you want to do a dedicated tax, you can do it through 50+1. We have more confidence now in that ruling. Now that this is not just San Francisco, it's Fresno too. We feel like it's worth the risk, and really encourage people to think about 2022 ballot measures through signatures. Signatures are tough right now and the pandemic is still going on, but knock on wood, that's going to change in the next few months. And for 2022, it's really key to think about that. We really need to try to avoid 2/3 wherever possible. The next thing is considering partners and compromise. Sonoma, Alameda County, they really looked at who else could we partner with? Who has momentum? As the woman from Angie said from Sonoma, what train can you jump on, right? Show them the polling, show them that they gain by partnering with children and youth, that children and youth investment is a compelling message. Think about who you could partner with, pay attention in those conversations, have as many of them as you can, ask your elected officials directly what else is going on. Make sure that who you could partner with. That's going to be a lot more effective in 2021 than if we wait till 2022. And then the last thing I heard is just, it is possible. We can do this, right? We can absolutely do this. People are nervous. They're nervous about taxes and change, their own survival. It's a stressed out time, but they recognize that we must invest in kids to be able to be successful, that the wealthiest have not had so much of a hard time during this pandemic. And the tax revenue shows that, and it's time to really push on these issues. So just a couple quick things on, what can we do now? One, we have to draw attention to the need. So 2021, what can we do from a 501c3 perspective at PR campaigns to focus on the needs, to take some of what Dave said on the messaging? How are young people impacted by COVID and the economic crisis, particularly in communities of color, particularly low-income families? What's happening to kids that aren't in school? How can we make these connections now? So then when we go to the voters and we ask for money next year or in 2024, they have heard this narrative. Let's use C3 dollars to be able to talk about how our families are struggling and the urgent need for support. The second thing you can do now, and I am a huge, huge fan of this, is build your list. This is something I would say that child advocacy groups don't do a great job of. We want to, when we launch a campaign, to have thousands of people ready to take action as volunteers, as potential donors, as folks who will share on social media. So take this time to build your list. There's a lot of ways you can do that, through petitions, by putting a really small amount of money in Google search ads and Facebook ads. We're not talking about thousands of dollars. For $500, you can start to build a list. That's really important. And it's something that we really need to be doing a better job of. Our team at 50+1 can help with that via Margaret, if you want to have a session and talk through that a little bit. Forge partnerships as you build that list. It's not just what organizations can we work together with, but how can we decide that we're going to swap lists and we're going to send out a joint action and we're going to come out together to be able to be stronger as we get to think about a campaign, really creatively working with other organizations to forge partnerships. The third thing, as I mentioned, is pay attention to what's happening. Who else is considering revenue measures? How could you partner? Do that this year. Fourth thing, approach funders now. If you have an idea about this, part of the reason why we have had not as much success, I think we would all want to, in some of these ballot measures, is too many of them are underfunded. And we've got to be able to talk to funders about the idea that by investing in these campaigns, the $100,000 that they could give to make a successful campaign is going to make it so that they don't need to give $1 million the following year, right? That we've got to start to push our funders in that way. I don't think we've been assertive enough in general on that, and I really encourage you to do that. And then the fifth and last thing is just use this network. This is a great example of folks learning from each other, but Margaret has just been amazing, as you all know, in connecting folks with each other, and we're a resource. Dave's an amazing resource. Ed Harrington's an amazing resource, all the folks in Margaret's network, and just utilize it. So that's it.
Yes, thank you. And can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. Oh, okay. I was hoping you'd end there because I want people to understand that we have an exciting year planned for us. All these wonderful people, including all the people who have spoken. You could spend days with each of them, and we are creating ways so that people can share what they've learned and then get support in building what they need to do this year. So I want to try something I haven't tried before, which is a poll. Can you see the poll? Hello.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
So can you see the whole thing, or do I have to scroll through it?
I can see
It's all there.
Really?
Is it, how many questions are there?
There are 3.
If you scroll through it, you can see them all.
Okay, so everybody's, if you're willing, would you scroll through the poll and see and try to answer them, and then we can share the answer. But while we're asking people to take the poll, I just want to be really clear that we have excitement ahead, and that this was to be just a taste of the richness of learning and ideas that are available when we share them. So we're going to have webinars. We're going to have webinars with our national partner, the Children's Funding Institute. We're going to do our own. Nicole can talk about list building. Dave can talk about polling. We can talk about youth organizing. We're going to hear from the lawyers about this not needing a 2/3 vote. So these are all things we're going to explore ahead. And specifically for those of you, I can see a growing number saying, yes, people are considering a ballot measure. And can you see the results, or can only I see the results?
You would have to share the results with us, I think.
How do I do that?
I think if you stop, you would have to stop the poll though.
Okay, so let's just do it a little more time. Then we can share the results, but I can see that people are interested in thinking about the ballot, and we're going to create a very special cohort of people who are serious about 2022 or 2024, so you can learn from each other. And now we can use Zoom to do that, and share strategies. And that's in addition to the broader webinars and learning opportunities that we're going to have for everyone. So I am going to be exploring in the next couple of weeks who wants to be part of a cohort, particularly that's thinking about 2022 or 2024, because it's to be decided in each case what would be best. And I am now going to end polling and then share results. Oh my God, I haven't done this before. I'm so excited. So look, we have 15 people, 15 places that are actually thinking about doing a measure, and 15 others that maybe. People like the idea of regular convenings and webinars. I don't know why some are red and some are blue, but anyway. And the issues that people want to look at include revenue options, digital communication. There you go, Nicole. Building winning coalitions, drafting measures. We're going to have my favorite lawyer helping us. This discussion of how to get measures to the ballot. People are really interested, Dave, in the messaging about taxes and revenue. So I think this gives us a lot to consider at Funding the Next Generation as we develop and improve upon our plans for the coming year. So I want to know if anybody else who's been a speaker wants to make any final comments. I have learned a huge amount from this, and I think that a lot of the lessons which Nicole articulated and which I put up on the screen earlier are very relevant. I'm inspired by the youth organizing that's going on, by the understanding that this is a process, by the understanding of the time that it takes to put this together, of what we can do about getting signatures and raising the dollars early to collect the signatures, which will make our life much easier. I will be sending out of the information, including Dave's polling information. We can look at that about which of these strategies are most popular and most likely to pass. And I want to thank you for participating, and I want to thank these wonderful speakers who kept to their 4 minutes. God bless them. Everybody thought I was insane to ask people to do that, and such a wonderful group of people from whom you can connect and learn. And I will be getting everybody's contact information out to people. And if you choose to join our cohort, these are people you will be in touch with and be able to pick their brains. And as they move on, and as we all move on, figuring out how we're going to sort of create an even stronger movement. So thank you. And yes, and we ended 3 minutes early, so I am just thrilled.
Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you.
I will share my screen again.
Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you all. This was fabulous. For those of you who are still on, these are some of the lessons I pulled out. They're very similar to what Nicole talked about. I really look forward to being in touch with people.
Margaret, we'll keep you updated on how things go in Sacramento.
Oh, yes. I mean, you're going to kick that mayor's ass. I know you are. But one of the things I learned in Sacramento was, you know, you got to become friends with your elected officials.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to make a comment?
Yeah, we're probably not friends. But we understood we had to work with him because
Friends was the wrong word.
Yeah, but thanks so much. We will definitely keep you updated, and thanks for the connection to Arise as well. They've been great.
Yes. Yeah.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.
Well, thank you, guys.
Margaret, you can hold on to the chat, right? There's a couple notes in here.
Yeah, you get somebody on the line. Correct me if I'm wrong. Hello.
I'm here.
Yeah, you can do it. You can hit the little dot.
We're still on. Yeah. Okay. So that was.
Hi, Margaret.
That was Nicole. She wanted to say the whole thing went great. She loved it.
Great.
Yeah. So if anybody else wants to make any comments, if not, I'll see you at the next at our next adventure together.
Right. If you need me for anything, Margaret, just let me know. Okay.
Okay. I will call you in a minute.